just so that we're all talking about common terms, and I mean, I'm certainly into your perspective or talking about clarification or whatever issues we kind of go, because you know, everybody has some sort of personal experience and insight, so that just adds if you're talking about specific instances, and we can then kind of break those down as we go too. I'm trying to figure out what the balance really is between fighting with a two-handed weapon against another two-handed weapon versus two-handed weapons against sword shield. And you're probably most likely going to be in the minority if you have a two-handed weapon out on the field fighting against a sword shield. So we probably want to spend a fair bit of that. But I mean, it's kind of up to you guys. I mean, if you'd rather just talk about the skills explicit to two-handed weapons, we can just stick on that. We can have a smaller amount of time to sword and shield stuff. I'm totally flexible in that.
Do they cross over?
Yeah, say.
Do they cross over if we learn the basic skills for them? Do they?
Oh, sure, certainly, yeah. But I mean, there's just a lot of things like when you're fighting somebody with a, you know, you're standing there with a two-handed sword and the other guy's got a spear. There's a lot, how that attack and how you're going to interact is going to be way different than a guy with sword and shield. Generally, sword and shield, when you're coming in on somebody with a you know, two-handed weapon, is about aggression and control. You want to get on top of the person instantly, and you want to have your sword or your shield in a position so that you can control the two-handed weapon. So as you engage, because if you can't get the weapon into either a downward position or getting them to retract into a defensive position, you're going to get hosed. they're going to beat the hell out of you. Or if you're not moving in aggressively enough, I see so many people where I mean, we'll get into this later, but they stand there and they go to move, but they're not really aggressing towards. They're kind of just, they stand at range and go, ha! And the guy with the pole goes, back! And just like skewers them in the face because they're not closing the range. They're not forcing the person with the two-handed weapon to be in a defensive mode. They're just walking into their offense is what it comes down to. So, but we'll talk about that more. Everything, though, would be applicable for the most part. There's a lot of things with a shield where you're feigning attacks, or you're putting attacks in positions where they're in like basically the blind spot. So you get somebody to commit by moving your weapon in a way where they lose track of it, and then you're basically going to bring it up out of the blind spot and jack them in the head or stick them in the guts, whatever. But you're gonna use the blind spot that's created by the shield to your advantage. So, guys standing there with a two-handed weapon, you got a two-handed weapon, not a lot to hide there. It's going to be a completely different interaction. So, but we will talk about the sword and shield stuff. Just how much time we spend on that is, you know, kind of up to us and how that works out. I wanted to start off by just talking about a lot of the terms with two-handed weapons are largely based around a lot of fencing. You know, essentially, I mean, you're gonna be talking a lot about center line stuff. You're gonna be talking about feints and parries, and you're gonna talk about lunges. You know, closing ranges where you're doing a lot of attacks where you're trying to get the opponent to move before you lunge, and then you're driving the pole arm out, and all that's pretty applicable. I'm not a rapier fighter. I'm not a fencer. I mean, I know enough to tell you how to do the blocks and how to weave through somebody's offense or defense, and I'll probably talk about it like that. But I'm not going to talk about it like I'm Mr. Rapier Fighter, because I can't. That's not my game. I know enough to deal with it when I have to, and that's where I kind of leave it. So, so anyhow, let's talk about, like I was talking about, the center line and looking at your opponent. And I'll do like a real quick. I'm not the greatest artist in the world, but it'll be interesting nonetheless, I'm sure. if you have your general guy standing here, and he's got his, usually they're right-handed fighter for the most part. The way that I look at an opponent when he's standing in front of me with sword and shield, or even if he's just standing without, if you imagine the shield not there, as I think about from where I'm standing, a center line running right up through the center of that person. So from my perspective, I'm looking at a line right down their center, and if I'm looking as a whole person standing in front of me, I try to break it into a quadrant that basically comes across their breaks at their waistline, and then down the center here. So I try to break it into quadrants about how I'm looking at my opponent. So that what I really want to try to do is I want to come in and make my attack now, or I'm going to try to stay in most likely 1, 2, or 4, but most likely if I'm in a position where I'm in 3, I'm going to get hosed. Because what generally happens is if you get locked down in 3 here, you're down like this, and it's very hard to make a recovery. Now I can step away and I can bring the weapon up, but it's hard for me to get back on center line because, especially with a shieldman, there's so much control that they can exhibit in that quadrant. I mean, once they step in and they push down, it's hard to overcome that. So what I try to do is when I'm looking at my opponent, I try to keep my pole pretty much just a little above the center. Where these two are meeting, I try to be slightly above that, essentially like in the center of the chest. Let me grab another color. I guess I will do 3 colors. I try to keep the pole or two-handed sword roughly aimed in that area right here, just at the crossing of the shoulders in the middle of the chest. Yeah, go ahead.
When you say that you keep it aimed there, are you keeping the blade aimed there, the tip aimed there?
Yeah, why don't, Vardy, you want to step up here for a minute? We'll just do it with two-handed swords. Actually, if you want to grab a shield, yeah, we'll look at the diagram with the shield. Go ahead and step on that side. So, yeah, turn a little bit more like that, like stand over there a little bit more. So, yeah, I'm starting like right about here. Now, we're not talking about range yet at all. I'm just saying, generally, I'm not being too far away from me because a lot of people get way away from their body and they get extended. And the thing is that your power pretty much rotates around the center that's running through, your center is running through the center of your head down through your pelvis, basically. And I want to keep this close as I can, and I don't want to be extended out over to leaning out too much, because I mean, if I'm doing that, it's very hard for me to move this with any power. I'm putting all the stress on my lower back and I'm extended. I really want to be in, but I'll start essentially like this, where my tip is up roughly at this point. Now there's a lot of things that will happen after that, but that's my essentially, like this would be my sort of relaxed ready position, and then my beginning position is going to be up, and I'm going to be pointing pretty much there. And so roughly right at this soft spot at the bottom of the throat, that's where I'm going to start. Where it progresses from there, but you'll notice I'm on the center line pretty much, and what that's going to allow me to do is as I step in and do my footwork, I'm not going to do everything where I'm extending away from my body as I'm moving. I'm going to do a lot of my footwork where I'm pulling in, and I'm actually pulling the blade closer to me rather than pushing it further away from me. A lot of people they'll do like high guards, or they'll do like here, or they do like some crazy samurai thing, and you know, that looks cool and everything, but I guarantee you, if you're standing here, unless you've got an excellent plan in mind or some move that you've practiced over and over and over again, he's going to come in with much less skill necessary to block and control my weapon. And I want to try to start where he is wary of my range, and